The small town of Oak Ridge was known for its quiet streets, neat lawns, and close-knit community. It wasn't the kind of place where secrets stayed buried for long, but sometimes people still tried. It was late spring in 2023, and everything in town felt like it was at a standstill, except for one person, Claire Donovan. Claire was a woman who had everything anyone could want. She had a successful career as a marketing director at a prominent local firm, a charming husband, Derek, who worked in law enforcement, and a beautiful home that overlooked the scenic Oak Ridge Lake. They were what people called the picture-perfect couple. From the outside, their life seemed to be everything anyone could dream of. Successful careers, a happy marriage, and a beautiful home. But, as it often goes, appearances can be deceiving. Derek had been the love of Claire's life since their high school days. They had grown up in Oak Ridge together, and after they both went off to college, they returned to the town they knew so well. They got married shortly after Claire finished her degree in business management, and Derek had already begun his career in law enforcement. Their wedding was the talk of the town, and it seemed like everyone had high hopes for the couple's future. But as time passed, Claire started to feel a sense of restlessness creeping in. It wasn't that she wasn't happy. She just wasn't fulfilled in the way she had once imagined. Derek, on the other hand, was always dedicated to his work. He loved being a police officer and helping keep Oak Ridge safe, but the long hours and the emotional toll of the job were starting to take a noticeable toll on their relationship. The nights spent alone on the couch, the long hours at the office, and the quiet mornings where the only conversation they had was about what happened on the latest episode of a TV show, were all starting to take their toll. Claire was feeling more and more disconnected from her husband. She didn't want to admit it, but it was becoming harder to ignore the distance between them. One evening, Derek came home from a long shift, and Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open as she went over some work emails. She hadn't cooked dinner, the house was quiet, and there was no conversation to fill the space. Derek barely looked up from his phone as he dropped his keys on the counter and muttered a quick hello. The lack of warmth from him stung more than she cared to admit. At work, Claire's mind wandered often. She tried to focus on her projects, but there was always a part of her that seemed distracted. That's when she met Tom. Tom was a new consultant hired by the firm to help streamline their marketing strategies. He was charming, with an easy smile and a confident way about him that made him instantly likable. He had a way of making Claire feel noticed again, like she wasn't just the marketing director. She was a person with thoughts, ideas, and desires that were worthy of attention. At first, their professional conversations were innocent enough. They met during team meetings, exchanged emails about the new marketing plan, and occasionally grabbed coffee together to talk about strategy. But there was an undeniable chemistry between them that neither of them could ignore. It wasn't long before their meetings turned into something more. Tom was always quick to compliment her, to remind her how smart and capable she was. And Claire, for the first time in months, felt seen. It started with harmless flirtations, comments about how her outfit looked that day, or how she seemed to be handling the pressure of her job so effortlessly. But one day, after a particularly tense meeting, Claire found herself sitting in Tom's office, just the two of them. It was supposed to be a quick conversation about the next steps in a project, but something about the way Tom looked at her made her heart race. The tension was palpable, and before she knew it, they were standing closer than they ever had before. One thing led to another, and Claire found herself leaning in for a kiss. It was electrifying. Everything she had been missing in her marriage seemed to flood through her in that moment. They kissed deeply, passionately, as though they had known each other for years. Afterward, Claire pulled away, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened. This wasn't who she was. This wasn't the life she had built with Derek. But as she sat there, the guilt started to set in. She knew she had crossed a line, but she also couldn't deny that the excitement and the attention felt amazing. The affection she had longed for in her marriage had been replaced by something far more dangerous. For the next few weeks, Claire tried to push the kiss out of her mind. But every time she saw Tom at work, or exchanged an email with him, that electric spark returned. She couldn't deny it anymore. She was drawn to him. Derek, on the other hand, remained oblivious. He was still consumed with work, and their interactions remained minimal. They barely spoke when he came home, and when they did, it was always about surface-level topics. The connection between them was fading, and Claire could feel herself drifting farther away from the man she once thought she would grow old with. Then one afternoon, Tom suggested they go for drinks after work. It was supposed to be casual, just a way to unwind from the pressures of the day. But as they sat across from each other at the bar, Claire's heart began to race again. The conversation was light at first. Work, family, life in Oak Ridge. But as the drinks flowed, the lines blurred. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and soon they were both leaning in, whispering in each other's ears. The kiss that followed was much more than the first one. It was deep, hungry, and filled with all the pent-up desire Claire had been holding back for so long. As the night wore on, Claire knew she had crossed a point of no return. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. She was having an affair, and Derek had no idea, but she couldn't stop. She found herself wrapped up in the excitement of sneaking around, meeting Tom in secret, texting him throughout the day, and keeping her double life hidden from her husband. It was a rush she couldn't deny. Tom made her feel alive in a way Derek hadn't in years. One evening, after another stolen kiss in Tom's office, Claire received a text from Derek. He'd finished work early and was coming home for the night. Her heart dropped into her stomach. For the first time, the weight of what she was doing hit her all at once. What had started as a harmless flirtation had turned into something much more serious. And now, there was no way out. She quickly texted Tom to let him know that things were over for the night. She had to face Derek, and the guilt that was growing heavier by the second. As she arrived home, Derek was already inside, sitting at the kitchen table, looking at her with a look of quiet concern. His gaze met hers, and in that moment, Claire realized just how much damage she had already done. The tension in the room was palpable as Claire stood frozen by the kitchen door. Derek was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him, looking more tired than usual. But it wasn't just exhaustion in his eyes. It was something else. Something that made Claire's heart race with guilt. She hadn't expected him to be home early that night. He had sent her a quick text earlier, saying he would be working late. But here he was, looking up at her like he was expecting an explanation. "Hey," Claire said softly, trying to sound casual, but she could hear the nervousness creeping into her voice. Derek didn't say anything right away. His eyes were locked on her, scrutinizing her as if he was seeing right through her, through all the walls she had carefully built around her secret life. Claire shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the weight of his gaze. He set his coffee mug down with a deliberate clink. "You're home early," he said, his voice cool but not angry. "Not yet, anyway. I needed a break," Claire replied, forcing a smile. It felt too wide, too practiced, and she knew Derek saw through it. He nodded slowly, as if processing her words. His silence was unbearable, stretching between them like a thick fog. Claire could feel the walls closing in on her. She knew Derek was trying to make sense of her behavior, trying to piece together the puzzle that was slowly falling apart. "How was work today?" Derek finally asked, though his tone made it clear he wasn't really asking out of concern. It was more like a formality, a way to fill the uncomfortable silence. "It was fine," Claire replied quickly, her mind racing. She was trying to focus, trying to stay calm, but all she could think about was how her double life was beginning to unravel. Just the usual meetings, planning. "You know how it is." "Yeah, I know," Derek said, but the way he said it sent a chill down Claire's spine. It was almost as if he wasn't just responding to her, but to something else, something deeper. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words, and Claire could feel it in her bones. Derek knew something was off. "Claire," Derek said, his voice suddenly more serious, more urgent. "What's going on with us?" Claire blinked, taken aback. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. This wasn't a simple, "How was your day?" moment. This was a question that cut to the heart of everything. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to play it off, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. Derek's expression softened. but there was still a hint of frustration in his eyes. I don't know, Claire. Things have been off for a while now. You've been distant. We don't talk like we used to. Hell, we don't even look at each other the same way. I don't know if it's work or what, but I can feel it. And I'm not stupid. I know when something's wrong. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to him. She had never wanted Derek to feel like this. She had never wanted to hurt him. But now the truth was staring her in the face. She had betrayed the one person who had always had her back, the person who had built a life with her. And it was all for a man who didn't care about her in the way she had hoped. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain herself? How could she tell him the truth without destroying everything? Derek stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them in slow, deliberate steps. Claire's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a confrontation she had been prepared for, but she knew it was coming. The lie she had been living could only go on for so long. Claire, Derek said softly, but his voice held an edge of pain now. I need you to be honest with me. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when I know it's not. I can't be in a marriage where I don't even know what's real anymore. What happened to us? Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes as the guilt weighed down on her chest. She had failed him in every way possible, and now there was no escaping it. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, but things got complicated. I got caught up in something. Derek's face was unreadable, but his eyes flickered with a mix of hurt and disbelief. Caught up in what? In who? The question hit Claire like a slap. She knew it was coming, but hearing it out loud felt like an assault on her conscience. Tom, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The name hung in the air, heavy and damning. Derek's expression changed instantly. His face flushed with anger and betrayal, and for a moment, Claire thought he might say something, do something, that would shatter everything. But instead he stood there, speechless. You've been seeing him, Derek said, his voice low and strained. All this time, you've been lying to me, pretending everything was fine, while you were with him. Claire nodded, her heart breaking with every word. Yes, she said softly. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean for it to go so far, but I trusted you. Derek cut in, his voice sharp now. I trusted you more than anyone in this world, and you betrayed that. You betrayed me. The words stung more than she expected, and Claire took a step back, her body shaking with emotion. She wanted to say something, to make it right, but she couldn't find the words. What could she possibly say? I'm sorry, she finally choked out, though the apology felt hollow. It was too late for apologies. Derek shook his head slowly, disbelief still painted on his face. Sorry? You don't get to be sorry now, Claire. This isn't something you can just apologize for. You've destroyed our marriage, and for what? For some guy who doesn't even care about you the way I do. I didn't mean to hurt you, Claire said, the tears flowing freely now. I felt lost. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix us. Derek looked at her, his gaze filled with an overwhelming sadness. You should have talked to me, Claire. You should have told me if something was wrong. But instead, you chose to do this behind my back. Claire's heart shattered at the finality in his voice. She had done this. She had destroyed everything for something that was never real. Tom had been a distraction, a fleeting moment of excitement in a life that was beginning to feel too mundane. But now the consequences were undeniable, and there was no going back. I never wanted to lose you, Derek, Claire whispered, her voice trembling. I never wanted this. I know, Derek replied softly, his voice filled with pain. But the damage is done, and I can't just forget what you've done to us. To me. The room fell silent, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Derek's next words were quiet, almost too soft to hear. I think it's time we figure out what's next. As the days wore on, the tension in the house between Olivia and Tom seemed to increase exponentially. It was as if a quiet storm was slowly brewing, and neither of them knew exactly when it would break, but they both could feel it. Tom had always been the kind of man who avoided confrontation. He preferred to pretend things were fine, even when they weren't. But Olivia, she wasn't one to stay silent, especially when the truth gnawed at her like it was now. The weight of the betrayal sat heavy on her chest. She had found the evidence, after all. She had seen the late-night texts, the innocuous-sounding messages that revealed far more than they should. Olivia had spent the last few days in a haze, replaying every moment, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Tom, for his part, seemed oblivious, or at least indifferent to the growing strain in their marriage. He carried on with his usual routine, never once mentioning his late nights at the office or the secretive phone calls that had become more frequent. Olivia's patience was running out, and her heart knew it was only a matter of time before she confronted him. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the air grew heavy with humidity, Olivia sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the screen of her phone. She had drafted the message so many times in her head, but now that it was time to send it, she hesitated. What would it do to their family if she exposed him? What if she lost everything? Her house, her life as she knew it? Still, it was a question that had no easy answer. She couldn't stay silent anymore, not with the lies piling up. The phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Tom. He was running late, as usual, but this time the message felt different. She could sense the coldness in the words, a stark contrast to the affectionate texts they had exchanged in the past. "I'll be home late tonight. Work's piling up." Olivia's fingers hovered over her screen, but she didn't reply. Instead, she put the phone down and walked to the living room. As she stood by the window, looking out over the city, she couldn't help but wonder where everything had gone wrong. The house felt empty, too quiet. She missed the days when it felt like home, when Tom's presence was enough to fill the space between them. Now it felt like a shell hollowed out by the lies and secrets. Tom's absence that night was the final straw. Olivia knew she couldn't wait any longer. Her heart hammered in her chest as she turned toward the door, determined. She was going to confront him. She had to know the truth, and whatever happened next, she would face it head-on. When Tom finally returned home, hours later than he had said he would be, Olivia was waiting for him. She didn't even try to hide the frustration in her eyes. She was done pretending everything was fine. "Tom," she started, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "We need to talk." He froze at the door, his expression unreadable, before stepping into the room. He had expected this, hadn't he? The tension had been building for days, but now it was finally coming to a head. Olivia's eyes narrowed as she crossed her arms, the weight of everything she had discovered pressing down on her shoulders. "What is it, Olivia?" Tom's voice had the edge of someone who knew they were cornered. "I know about the affair," she said, her voice cutting through the thick silence in the room. "I know you've been seeing her. I know what you've been hiding." The words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog, and for a moment, Tom didn't respond. His face drained of color, and he took a step back, his breath caught in his throat. Olivia watched him, waiting for an explanation, but there was nothing.
No apology, no remorse.
Just silence. "How long?" she demanded. "How long has this been going on, Tom?" He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself, but his words faltered. "Olivia, please. You don't get to beg now," Olivia snapped. "You had your chance. I've been waiting for the truth, for you to tell me everything, but you kept lying, kept hiding it. So, don't you dare try to play the victim now." Her heart raced as she realized how much power she had in that moment. She had finally taken control. No longer would she let herself be the one left in the dark, waiting for him to make a decision. The decision had already been made, and it was her turn to decide what came next. "I'm sorry, Olivia." Tom's voice cracked as he spoke. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Never meant for it to go this far?" Olivia repeated, incredulous. "You didn't mean for it to go this far, but here we are. And you've been lying to me for months, Tom. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you?" Tom opened his mouth to speak but then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. The silence between them grew unbearable, each second stretching into eternity. "Who is she?" Olivia asked, her voice quieter now, though it was laced with anger. "Who is the woman you've been seeing?" Tom hesitated. He looked down at the floor, then back at Olivia, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Her name is Sarah. We've been seeing each other for months." Olivia felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. The name meant nothing to her, but it felt like the final blow, a name that would forever be associated with the betrayal of their marriage. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but it was impossible. The truth was out now, and there was no taking it back. "How long, Tom?" Olivia demanded again. "How long have you been seeing her behind my back?" "Almost a year," he admitted, his voice barely audible. A year. That was how long Tom had been lying to her, pretending everything was normal while secretly carrying on an affair. Olivia could barely breathe as the weight of his confession hit her. All the late nights, all the excuses, all the moments that had seemed so trivial in the moment, they had all been part of his deception. Tom was waiting for her to say something, anything, but Olivia couldn't bring herself to speak. What was there left to say? Everything had already been said. His words had laid bare the truth, and now there was nothing left but the cold, bitter reality. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice steady but cold. "I want you to leave." Tom's face crumpled in shock, and for the first time, Olivia saw the man she had once loved for what he truly was. A liar, a cheat, someone who had destroyed everything they had built together. "You want me to leave?" he repeated, disbelief in his voice. "Olivia, we can fix this. We can work through it." But Olivia shook her head.
No, Tom.
"You don't get to fix this. You don't get to destroy our marriage and then ask me to fix it for you. I've made up my mind. I want you gone." The words hung between them, final and unyielding. Tom didn't speak, his expression a mixture of pain and regret. He knew, deep down, that there was no coming back from this. "Leave," Olivia repeated, her voice unwavering. "Now." Olivia stood in the doorway, watching Tom gather his things in a daze. Every movement he made felt mechanical, like he wasn't even present in the moment. It was as if he knew that this was the end, and he didn't know how to deal with it. For so long, Olivia had been the one holding things together, keeping their marriage intact, even when the cracks had started to show. Now, with a cold resolve, she realized that it was her turn to be the one to break free. "Are you just going to leave?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger, disbelief, and a strange sense of relief. She couldn't quite decide if she felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders or if it had just shifted into something sharper, heavier. "Just like that." Tom paused, halfway through packing a suitcase. He looked at her, and for a moment, it seemed like he was trying to find the right words. But what could he say? What could he offer her now? The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. "I never wanted this, Olivia," Tom finally said, his voice small, his shoulders slumped. "I never meant for you to find out like this. But I'm sorry. I am." Olivia's heart hardened at the sound of his apology, a mix of regret and pity that felt like salt on a wound. "Sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough." "I'm sure you are," she replied bitterly. "But I don't want your sorry. I want the truth. And the truth is, you've been lying to me for months, hiding things from me. You've been pretending like nothing was wrong, while behind my back you've been with someone else. Someone else in my life, in our home." Her voice caught in her throat. "I gave you everything, Tom, and this is how you repay me." Tom ran a hand through his hair, the frustration and guilt clouding his face. "I don't know how it happened, Olivia. I don't know what went wrong. But I'm telling you, I didn't mean for it to end up like this." "Yeah." Olivia's voice rose, her emotions spilling over. "I thought we were building something. I thought we had a future together. But apparently, you were building it with someone else, behind my back." The weight of her words hit harder than she expected. She knew they were true, but hearing them out loud, seeing the hurt in Tom's eyes, it stung. Still, she didn't care. This wasn't about sparing his feelings anymore. This was about her. She had to think of herself now. "Olivia," Tom said softly, stepping toward her. "Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this." Olivia shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You think that fixes it?" she spat. "You think that's going to magically make everything better? You don't get to fix this, Tom. You don't get to pretend like everything is okay anymore. You crossed a line. A big one." Tom opened his mouth to say something more, but Olivia cut him off.
No.
"I don't want to hear it," she said, her voice firm. "It's over." And with that, the silence between them stretched to an unbearable length. The weight of their years together, the love they once shared, and the years that now seemed wasted hung in the air. Olivia felt as though she had just ripped a part of herself out, one she wasn't sure she could ever get back. Without another word, Tom walked out of the room, dragging his suitcase behind him. Olivia stood there for a moment, frozen, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading away. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her chest heavy. She had made the decision to end it, but now the reality of what she had done began to set in. Was this really what she wanted? Was there any way to move forward? The sound of the front door closing snapped her out of her thoughts, and Olivia walked to the window, looking down at the empty driveway. The house felt quieter, emptier now. She had won in a way. She had confronted him, demanded the truth, and now he was gone. But was it really a win? Or had she just set herself up for something far worse? Hours passed, and still, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The house felt too still, and she couldn't shake the echo of her words, still ringing in her ears. She walked around the house, picking up the pieces of their broken life. Photos scattered across the living room floor, a wedding picture sitting face down on the coffee table, the remnants of a life that once seemed so perfect now reduced to shattered glass. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment, afraid of what it might be, but she reached for it anyway. It was a text from Sarah, the woman Tom had been seeing. Olivia's stomach twisted as she unlocked the phone. "I don't know what happened, but he's leaving you, Olivia. I don't want him anymore. I'm done. You can have him." Olivia stared at the text, her blood running cold. She knew Tom was selfish, but this? To be tossed aside like this, just as easily as he had tossed her aside. The rawness of it hit her hard. She had thought Sarah was the one who was tearing everything apart, but now it seemed like Sarah had decided she was done with Tom. The very thought of it made Olivia sick to her stomach. Was this it? Was this the end? Olivia had no idea, but she was certain of one thing. She wasn't going to let herself be dragged down any further. She wasn't going to stay in this house, surrounded by all the memories of a marriage that was built on lies. She needed to move on. She needed to regain control. Olivia picked up her phone again and deleted Sarah's text. She wouldn't let herself be controlled by it. She had made her decision. She had confronted Tom, and now it was time to rebuild. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But she had to try. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the quiet streets outside, Olivia sat alone at the kitchen table, her mind swirling. The house was still and silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. She could feel the weight of the hours dragging on, each minute stretching out longer than the last. It was almost as if she was waiting for something, waiting for Tom to come back and apologize, waiting for Sarah to send another text, waiting for something that would give her some kind of clarity. But as the clock ticked on, the only thing that became clear was how much she had been deceived. She had spent so much time trying to understand why things had gone wrong, trying to piece together a life with a man who had lied to her, who had built an entire world of secrets right under her nose. And now, here she was alone, the remnants of their life scattered around her like broken glass. The tension in the air was thick, the silence oppressive. Olivia wasn't sure if it was the stillness of the house or the realization of what had happened that was making it feel so suffocating. It was like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. The sound of her phone buzzing on the table startled her. She picked it up without thinking, her eyes scanning the message. It was from an unknown number. "I know what you did, and I know you're trying to fix it, but it's too late now. You can't undo what's been done." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Her first instinct was to block the number, but something in her gut told her to read on. She tapped the screen again. "Tom's gone. And Sarah? She's already moved on. I thought you should know." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The realization that Sarah was now completely done with Tom sent a wave of bitterness through her. Not only had Tom hurt her, but now, the woman he had been seeing had completely discarded him. Olivia didn't know whether to feel sympathy for him or to be relieved that Sarah had made a clean break. Either way, it stung, and the weight of it all felt unbearable. A few minutes passed before Olivia heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding her breath until the tension in her chest began to ease. She stood up from the table, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was preparing herself for something she already knew was coming. The door opened, and she watched as Tom stepped inside, his suitcase in hand, his face drawn and tired. There was no apology in his eyes, no sign of regret, just the dull, hollow stare of a man who knew he had reached the end. "I didn't expect to see you here," Olivia said, her voice cold, guarded. The warmth she once felt for him seemed like a distant memory now, fading into the background. Tom dropped his suitcase by the door and looked at her, his face pinched with the strain of what had happened. "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted. "I thought I might try to talk to you, to explain." "Explain what, Tom?" Olivia's voice cracked, frustration bubbling up. "There's nothing to explain. You made your choice, just like I made mine." He took a step toward her, his eyes pleading. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, and I've been trying to fix it. I've been trying to make it right." The words felt empty to her now. She had heard them all before. She had waited for them, hoped for them. But now, they meant nothing. "You can't just fix this, Tom," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just make it right. You destroyed everything. And you expect me to just forgive you?" Tom's face contorted with emotion, his hands balling into fists. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. I don't know what happened, but I can't undo it. I can't fix it, I know that. But can't we try? Can't we at least talk about what comes next?" Olivia shook her head. "What comes next?" she asked bitterly. "What comes next is me picking up the pieces of my life and moving on without you." The words were like daggers, and for a moment, Olivia saw the truth of it in Tom's eyes. He knew she was right. This wasn't something that could be repaired. Not anymore. A heavy silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken weight of what had transpired. Olivia felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This wasn't a time for weakness. This was a time for strength. She had been strong for so long, but now, facing Tom one last time, she realized just how broken she was. She didn't know how to move forward. She didn't know how to let go of everything she had thought was real. "I never thought it would end like this," Tom said softly, his voice filled with regret. "I thought we had something special." "We did," Olivia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We did. But you threw it away." "For what?" Tom didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. There was no justification for what he had done, no explanation that could make it right. And in that moment, Olivia understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. She didn't need an explanation. The truth was right in front of her. "I think it's time for you to leave," Olivia said, her voice firm. She had made up her mind. There was no turning back now. Tom nodded slowly, the weight of his own guilt hanging heavy in the air. "I'm sorry," he said again, but the words felt hollow. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving the house and, in a sense, Olivia herself, to face the aftermath of the betrayal. Olivia watched him leave, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty house. The silence that followed felt suffocating, but it also felt like the beginning of something new. Something that didn't involve Tom. She stood there for a long time, her thoughts swirling. Everything had changed in an instant, and now, she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, unsure of what would come next, but determined to rebuild. As Olivia stood in the empty living room, the silence was deafening. The last remnants of her life with Tom, the life they had built together, seemed to echo around her. Every corner of the house held memories that once brought her comfort, now tainted by betrayal. The kitchen, where they had shared countless meals, felt cold. The living room, where they used to sit on the couch and laugh, felt distant, like a scene from someone else's life. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But the weight of everything, Tom's affair, the lies, the shattered trust, was crashing down on her. There was no escape from the truth, no way to go back to the way things were. The only choice she had now was to move forward. But how? She didn't know what her next step would be, or even where to start. The life she had known was slipping away from her, and she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from her best friend, Emma. "How are you holding up?" Olivia stared at the message for a moment, the words feeling almost foreign to her. She had been so focused on everything falling apart that she hadn't even stopped to think about how she was feeling. Her emotions were a whirlwind. Anger, sadness, betrayal, confusion, all blending together into something she couldn't quite understand. "I'm surviving." The response came easily, but it didn't feel real. How could she survive when everything she had known was collapsing? Olivia sank onto the couch, her hands trembling as she scrolled through her phone. There were texts from Tom, from Sarah, from her parents. All of them seemed like distant voices, reminding her of the life she had lost. She couldn't even bring herself to open them. It was like reliving the pain all over again. The doorbell rang. Startled, Olivia stood up and glanced toward the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Who could it be? Her heart raced in her chest, an uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward the door. Maybe it was someone from the building maintenance team. Maybe it was someone bringing a package. But deep down, she knew who it was. When she opened the door, there stood Tom. His face was lined with exhaustion, his eyes filled with regret. He looked different, smaller somehow, as if the weight of everything had crushed him. His hands were in his pockets, and he was standing with a kind of resignation that made Olivia's chest tighten. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling, despite her attempt to sound composed. She wasn't sure whether she was angry, hurt, or both. I needed to see you," Tom said quietly. "I can't just walk away from this, Olivia. I can't just pretend everything is fine." Olivia stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. The man who had lied to her, the man who had broken her trust, was now standing at her door, asking for another chance? Did he really think that he could fix everything with a few words? That he could just walk back into her life and make everything okay? "You can't fix this, Tom," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing left to fix. You made your choice, and now I have to deal with the consequences of your mistakes." Tom's face twisted in pain. He took a step forward, but Olivia held up her hand, stopping him. She couldn't let him get too close. Not again. Not after everything he had done. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice filled with desperation. "I've been a fool. I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. But please don't let this be the end. We can fix this. We can work through it." Olivia shook her head, her breath catching in her throat. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice cracking. "I don't even know who you are anymore. How can I fix something that's been broken beyond repair? How can I trust you again?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy and filled with finality. She could see the pain in his eyes, the regret, but it wasn't enough. Couldn't be. She had given him everything. She had trusted him, and he had betrayed her. "I don't know what you want from me, Tom," Olivia continued, her voice steadying. "I don't know if you want forgiveness, or if you want us to just go back to how things were. But that's not possible. I can't go back to you. I can't go back to us. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but Olivia didn't wait for him to speak. She turned and walked back into the apartment, leaving the door open behind her. She needed space. She needed time to breathe. She couldn't keep doing this. A few seconds later, she heard the door close behind her. She didn't turn around. The decision had been made. There was no more to say. The next few days felt like a blur. Olivia spent her time in a haze, unsure of what to do or where to go. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. She had lost everything. Her marriage, her trust, her sense of who she was. She had been living in a lie, believing that everything was fine, when in reality, everything was falling apart. She thought about Tom, but more and more, she realized how much of her life had been built around him. He had been her world, her everything, and now that world had crumbled. She had to find a way to rebuild herself from the ground up. But how? The phone buzzed again, and this time, Olivia didn't hesitate. It was another message from Sarah. Olivia, we need to talk. I know you're angry, but I never meant for it to go this far. Please, let me explain. Her heart raced as she read the message. Sarah, the woman who had been part of this betrayal. The woman who had been with Tom for months. Olivia didn't know what she expected from her, but she knew that she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't let Sarah think she could just walk away from this, thinking that everything was going to be fine. She quickly typed a response. I don't want to hear it, Sarah. Whatever you have to say, it doesn't matter anymore. You've both destroyed everything. She hit send and put her phone down on the table. For the first time in days, she felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was enough to know that she had made a decision. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She was going to move forward, no matter how painful it might be. Later that evening, Olivia sat on the couch, her mind racing. The house was still and quiet. It had been a long time since she had felt this way, this sense of finality, of peace that came with the end of a chapter. But she knew there was no going back. The life she had built with Tom was gone. Now all that was left was to find a new path forward. As she stared out the window, watching the sunset, Olivia realized something important. It wasn't about finding a way to fix the past. It was about finding the strength to move forward and rebuild her life from the ground up. The days that followed were filled with silence, the kind of silence that felt heavy and suffocating. Olivia had spent so much time lost in the whirlwind of emotions, trying to make sense of the mess that Tom and Sarah had created, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be at peace with herself. But now, with everything out in the open, she was forced to reckon with the truth. Tom had left, and with his departure, the house seemed even emptier than before. It felt like a hollow shell, a place where only memories lingered. For the first time in months, Olivia had space to think, to breathe. And it was in this stillness that she started to realize something. She could rebuild. She didn't know how yet, or what that would even look like. But she knew that she wouldn't let herself fall into despair. She had spent too long being defined by her relationship with Tom. It was time to define herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ping of a message on her phone. She hesitated for a moment, not sure if she was ready to face it. But as she picked up the phone and saw it was from Sarah, her resolve hardened. Olivia, I know things seem impossible right now, but I need to apologize. I was weak and I let everything go too far.
Ihutju, andi regret ite.
Please don't carry the weight of this forever. I wish I could take it all back. Olivia stared at the message, feeling a mixture of anger and sorrow. She had wanted answers, but now that she had them, they didn't feel like the relief she thought they would be. Sarah's apology, while sincere, didn't change the reality of what had happened. It didn't change the fact that her trust had been shattered, her life turned upside down. She typed a quick response, not wanting to give Sarah the satisfaction of a prolonged conversation. I don't need your apology. I need time to heal, and that means letting go of everything, including you. Take care of yourself, but don't contact me again. Once the message was sent, Olivia set her phone down and took a deep breath. There was no turning back. The relationships that had defined her life had crumbled, and she knew now that she had to focus on herself. The next few weeks were a blur of moving forward. Olivia packed up her things, well, the things she wanted to keep, and moved into a small apartment in the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The quiet of the apartment was comforting at first, a safe haven from everything that had happened. But slowly, the loneliness crept in. She missed the bustling of family life, the warmth of having someone to share her day with. But she reminded herself, she was stronger than she realized. She started going to therapy, not just to work through the betrayal, but to understand why she had stayed in a relationship that made her feel invisible for so long. Why had she allowed herself to be swept up in the lie that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't? It wasn't an easy journey, but with each session, Olivia found herself learning more about her own needs, her own desires. She began to accept that her self-worth wasn't tied to her relationship with Tom. She was enough just as she was. As the months passed, she found herself reconnecting with the things she had once loved. She began painting again, something she hadn't done in years. It was something she had always enjoyed, but had set aside in favor of focusing on her relationship. Now, with her emotions pouring out onto the canvas, she felt a sense of release she hadn't known she needed. One afternoon, as Olivia was walking through the city, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. She frowned, hesitating before opening it. "Olivia, it's Tom. I just wanted to let you know I'm sorry for everything. I've been seeing a therapist, and I realize now how much I took you for granted. I'm working on myself. I don't expect anything from you, but I just wanted you to know I'm truly sorry." Olivia read the message twice, the words sinking in. Part of her wanted to respond, to lash out, to tell him everything she had been feeling. But another part of her felt nothing. No anger, no regret. Just a quiet emptiness. She had already moved on, in her own way, and she realized that holding on to this past wasn't going to do anything for her now. She deleted the message. The door to her new life had been opened, and she was walking through it, step by step. There was no more room for the past. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Olivia began to find her footing again. She surrounded herself with people who cared for her, who valued her for who she was, not for the woman she had been in Tom's shadow. She learned to laugh again, to feel joy in the small things. She discovered that her worth was not tied to the mistakes she had made, or the people who had wronged her. She was worthy of love and respect, and most importantly, she was worthy of giving that same love to herself. One evening, as Olivia sat in her apartment, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset, she realized something important. The past, with all its pain and heartbreak, no longer had the power to define her. She had built her life on her own terms, and she would continue to do so. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Emma. "How's everything going? I know it's been a tough road, but I'm so proud of how far you've come. I can't wait to see what you do next." Olivia smiled as she typed her reply. "Thank you. It's been a journey, but I'm finally finding my way." As she hit send, she realized just how far she had come. She had faced her pain, worked through it, and emerged stronger. The woman she was now was someone who had learned the hardest of lessons but had come out the other side, ready to embrace the future. And as she took one last look out at the sunset, Olivia knew that the best was yet to come. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. Until next time, take care.